Alright, so I am making this video once again because the last one I made, which was about 2 years ago, was muted. So we're back to Oversimplified WW2. And yeah, let's just hop on into this. I really have nothing else to say.
This video was made possible
by
Skillshare.
Yeah, no one cares about this.
Churchill was a man with many talents. Ooh. He was an artist, a butterfly enthusiast, and he had an unpublished manuscript about aliens.
Was he actually like that?
He was a man with an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Maybe he could have loaded up his computer
he's gonna talk about the sponsor.
An online learning community
right here.
Subscription and learn something new today. Now, without further ado.
Ooh, suspenseful.
It's 1902. A young man by the name of Benito Mussolini moves from Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service.
Smart moves.
He gets big into socialism, working for trade unions,
not
writing
smart
for socialist
moves.
newspapers, advocating
Very
for
not
violent
smart
overthrow of European
moves.
monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested, sent back to Italy, set free, returns to Switzerland, is arrested again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after
this sucks.
As an elementary school teacher, he finally returns
you
to work
freaking
as
kids.
an avid socialist. His speeches and journalistic abilities made him famous among Italian
I like the cut of his jib.
So when Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted and got arrested.
For a third time.
Came along, and once again, he protested Italy's involvement. But then he thought, wait a minute, this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist revolution.
But France is not a monarchy.
Suddenly he was pro-war, but his fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism.
I thought socialism was like communist.
Tearing us apart, but based on unity through nationality. We'll conquer the Mediterranean and reunite all Italian peoples, just like the days of the Roman Empire. I'll call it fascismo, and it will guide the Italian nation to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with bold.
What? Oversimplified WW2. Sponsored by Skillshare.
Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I, and
Woohoo!
they hoped they were going to get a lot out of it, but in the end, they only got a little,
They didn't
and they
get
felt
anything.
cheated. On top of that,
Hey, they got Ottoman
the weak governments
territory.
meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his fascist movement gained a lot of support.
I don't think he's going to fix
he went to
everything.
the king and said, make me prime minister, or I'll make me prime minister. And the king said, you and what army? This army.
Oh! That's a lot of
Then he went about establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany
Hitler.
had been on the loser's side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the
Holocaust.
Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to demilitarize the Rhineland, had to reduce their army to just 100,000 men, couldn't have an air force, had to pay the Allies a huge amount of money that it didn't. And a new rule was established that every Englishman withheld the right to walk into the center of Berlin, pick out any German they wanted, and spank the hell out of them. I made that last one up, but it helps you understand how all this felt to Germans. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything, the German people loved it. Hitler had been a soldier during World War I.
He has,
and he was
actually.
crazy patriotic, and nobody was
I did
mad
not
at
know
him
that
about
Hitler was a
Germany's
soldier
humiliation.
during
He helped start
World
a
War
new
I.
political party, and in 1923 attended a march on Munich with his boys. And then he got arrested.
Yeah.
But his popularity
Yeah, he got
grew and
arrested.
grew, and in 1933, the president made him chancellor. He believed he was.
Oh, not
Germany's
Hindenburg.
destiny.
We already know what happened to the Hindenburg.
Establishing a dictatorship with himself
Blew
at
up
its
into
center.
pieces.
Europe had fascist dictator number 2.
Okay.
Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas, but more importantly, they had the same enemies, and they
France,
started to
Soviet
get along.
Union.
Anyone else want to be
Okay.
friends? Franco? No?
No, Spain was, like, Spain was
Exactly.
exhausted.
It's
That's
Japan,
why they don't
and
want to
they've
join
taken
in.
over northern China. Let's rewind a
I'm
bit.
surprised Japan wanted to join after all the
Japan had
troops they
isolated itself
wasted.
from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed
And
up
then,
said,
yeah,
"You're
the
gonna trade with
Americans.
us and you're gonna like it."
It's
And
always the
Japan
Americans.
imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They
We're
also had
bust.
no natural resources, so they decided to go get some. They went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over.
Actually,
Korea,
they went
and
to war
took
with
a bunch of
Korea.
China's stuff. But then the West
Then
said,
they went
"Hey,
to war with
cut
China."
that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, "Okay, I guess
Bye.
we'll just go home." Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage
Russia,
of a weakened
Germany,
China and setting up
Britain,
spheres of influence.
France.
But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so. Okay, see ya. So Japan
Wow.
thought, screw this, and went to war with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't
I
stop
thought they
there.
did
In World War I,
that
they
earlier.
took Germany's colonies and
I
islands
have
in Asia.
hiccups.
And then in an incident that was maybe staged by the Japanese,
Probably.
the bomb blew up a Japanese train in Manchuria, giving them an excuse to launch an invasion and take over. So here's the situation. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy,
just
Japan
Germany? We don't say Nazi here.
All feel hostility towards the Allies.
And the US too.
Take over more stuff.
I thought they were fine about the US.
Let's start with Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his army. The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back to the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders
if they do nothing.
The Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing.
What?
The military re-strengthened. He could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so,
but then you lose the other race. Actually, since he's Hitler, I'm not surprised that he would decrease the other races.
The Allies finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement, and it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, "I want that thing."
Oh, I know this. I want that thing. You can't have the thing. Oh, you can have that thing.
No more. I want that thing. And repeat.
Repeat a lot.
This is a cozy.
Why is it whenever I do an oversimplified video, it's at this time when I get an advertisement?
1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance.
Okay.
Boom, this is Germany now. Next, he demanded to be given the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting with Hitler in Munich and said, "Look, we're going to give you what..." Hang on, this meeting is about my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too?
No.
Anyway, we're going to give you
They
what you
really
want.
didn't.
Really? Yeah. Just like that? Yep. What's the catch? Just sign this piece of paper promising you won't invade the rest of
I
Czechoslovakia.
will be chill.
Okay. Then Chamberlain returned home victorious, waving his signed piece of paper in the
Woohoo!
air, declaring the crisis to be averted and the continuation of world peace. And we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor, and every day
Censor that!
we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia.
He actually did.
You lied to me.
He's
What do
Hitler.
you expect? I'm Hitler.
Exactly,
Not
he's
yet
Hitler.
done. Mussolini also wanted to get in on the action. He thought to himself, isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and
Let me
arrows
guess,
and
there
wooden
is.
spears? Oh, there is?
Abyssinia?
Fantastic.
Isn't that basically
Italy
Ethiopia?
also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe staged by the Japanese, gunfire was exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge, and the Japanese launched yet another invasion against China.
Whoa,
They swept
chill,
through Beijing
Japan.
and Shanghai, and then advanced through the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanking. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people.
War
Back in
crimes.
Europe, Germany and Italy made their
Oh, I like how you
relationship
made
status official by signing
Slovakia
the
a
Pact
puppet
of
state
Steel.
and gave
Then,
some land to
Hitler turned his
Hungary.
eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor, splitting Germany in two. At this
That
point,
was
the
the
Allies really
only
had to take their
access
foot
that
down,
Poland
and they
had
warned
to
him
the
that
sea,
an invasion
though.
of Poland would mean war. Hitler had
So might as well
planned
just
to
give that
move
exclave to
eastward, but he
Poland.
didn't want to end up fighting a war on two fronts. So for now, he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, "How about we both invade Poland and split it between the two of us? And I definitely won't not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the future."
He's gonna betray you sometime in the future.
Sounds good.
He's looking
This
at
new
him
alliance
very
stunned the West.
suspicious.
On the 1st of September 1939, German troops entered Poland, and Britain and France declared war on Germany.
Ooh.
The Poles fought hard, but they were no
They
match for
really
the two
did.
giants crashing down on them from either side. Then came a period known as the Phony War, where everyone just sort of sat around not doing much. The French had launched a siege into the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France,
wants to
the
go
French were
home,
still
everybody?
super proud of their victory in
We
World
are
War
number
I,
one.
and they hadn't really moved on from it. They still used horses, they dispatched
did.
messages by motorbike instead of using radio.
And they
Orders from
still
the
use
commanders
tanks.
were
Tanks
usually
were
paid,
in
and the
World
troops
War
were
One,
rarely
so they must
inspected.
still be
They
using
built a line of
tanks.
defenses along their German border, but didn't bother extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy. And at first the UK
That's
wasn't
what you're
much
supposed
better.
to do,
Chamberlain
though,
still
right?
naively hoped that the war could be ended
Unless you're on the
diplomatically.
enemy's
Instead
side.
of bombing raids, the RAF dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war. They also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France
Wow.
wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War, and so they wanted to keep
Well,
the
too
war
bad,
as
too
far
sad.
from
Just
home as
go
possible.
to,
So they
just
turned their
enter
eyes
Germany.
north, towards Norway. Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany through neutral Norway,
Okay.
so the Allies
Okay,
asked
well,
if they
you can
could
just-
please stop exporting iron ore
Okay,
to
well,
Germany,
let's go
but
back
this
to
request
that.
was
Let's go
refused.
back.
Avoid a repeat of the First World War, and so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they turned their eyes north, towards...
You can just, like, since the iron ore was, like, right here, you can just do it into, like, the Baltic Sea and then do it down to Germany. Or was it not possible at the time? That's what I wonder.
Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany.
Yeah,
through
exactly.
neutral Norway,
You
so
don't
the
need to
Allies
do it
asked
the
them if
long
they could
way.
please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but this request was refused. Then the Soviet Union attacked Finland, so the Allies said, How about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your amphibians. But Norway and Sweden still said no. So the UK mined the waters around Norway to force any transport ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion through Denmark.
Denmark surrendered in 6 hours.
To land troops at key ports along the coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. The Allies had to retreat. After this slightly embarrassing failure, Chamberlain resigned and was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had a slightly different approach to dealing with the Germans. Hitler's overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy. Attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process, then turn on the Soviet Union and win the war. During the Phony War, the Allies had given Hitler time to prepare his forces. Now, he was ready to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused, and in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the German invasion head-on, and it looked like a repeat of the First World War was coming. But this time, Hitler had a trick up his sleeve. Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then, to the south, the French
really
left
could
the
slow down
Ardennes,
the
an area
Allies.
full of hills and forests, pretty underdefended, because they thought it was naturally impenetrable. Well, the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had.
There's a lot of forces and a lot of resources.
And encircled the Allied armies at lightning speed. The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies and nearly wiping out the British too. But they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey to bring their young men home. With most of the French forces depleted, the Germans breezed through, Paris, and France fell. What the Germans couldn't do in World War I, Hitler had done just like that.
Wish I had YouTube Premium.
Hitler hoped that with the fall of France, the UK would also lose hope and sue for peace. But quite
they didn't.
It didn't, and he needed to secure the Western Front, so he tried to force them into submission with mind games. The UK were now all alone, and Hitler wanted to emphasize that. First of all, just before France fell, Italy finally declared war on the Allies, making the UK's situation even worse. Next, instead of just occupying all of France, Hitler occupied the coastal areas for defense, but allowed France to continue its existence as a German puppet.
Of course, Switzerland is just surrounded by fascist states.
Had decided to switch sides. Hitler also hoped
but I'm pretty sure that Italy had a good relation with Switzerland at a time. So if Germany was going to invade Switzerland, Italy would switch sides either way.
Hitler then began laying down plans for an invasion
U.S., not the U.S. That's what it says.
He would first need air and naval superiority across the channel. Waves of German bombers came, while the completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an attempt to quell the German attacks. At first, the Luftwaffe targeted British ports and coastal facilities. Then it attacked RAF bases, crippling the RAF's ability to defend the nation. And it looked like Hitler's great British invasion was coming. But then, Churchill ordered a small but insignificant bomb raid over Berlin. It didn't do much damage, but Hitler was furious, and he immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks.
Oh, I see what they did there. Furious.
Away from their parents to avoid danger.
Oh, puppy.
Trips to air raid shelters became a daily occurrence, but British morale held firm. Smiling, knitting, lounging casually, these people have.
How do you lounge on train tracks?
Also gave the RAF breathing space to
good show.
So Hitler shot himself in the foot there.
Yeah, just
the
foot.
foot for now.
Yeah.
Finally, the Luftwaffe sent one massive all-out attack on London, and the RAF successfully repelled it, destroying many of the German aircraft and placing air superiority firmly in British hands.
And then you also had, there was some islands, islands right there. There were some islands right there, so right by France. World War II, here we go, I see U.S. flags, so.
This video was made possible by Skillshare, an online learning
I swear to God, if the intro
Stick around
is...
until the end of the video to learn how you can get an exclusive deal just for Oversimplified viewers. So what else is happening?
Nothing.
Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true. Many Commonwealth nations and other Allied colonies had joined the war in Britain's support. They would play a key role throughout the war.
Whoops, sorry, Canada. I was gonna say, why is there a U.S. flag there?
On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the defensive tripartite.
And I thought you said, where was it? Where was it?
Bringing their military.
Oh my gosh.
Campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed.
Why is
the defensive tripartite pact?
Oh no. Okay. Why does Japan not have Taiwan or Korea? That's kind of weird. Okay.
Bringing their military alliance even closer together.
Ooh.
The Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display.
Oof.
In the end, they did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then,
that's
they
not
continued
much
their
land,
honorable
though.
campaign of pushing around much smaller countries by annexing the Baltic
Okay, the
states
Baltics were
and part
pretty
northern
easy, and Romania was pretty
colonies in
easy.
Equatorial Africa were like, heck no, we aren't going to join the Germans, and they all pledged their allegiance to free France, except for Gabon, which had to be taken by military force. The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar.
Yeah, how did the Gambia survive that?
And he thought now it was Italy's time to shine, so he tried to take British Somaliland, and that went pretty well. Then he tried
Was
to
there like no Vichy French troops in Africa?
Churchill began referring to Italy as Europe's soft underbelly.
Oh!
He began favoring a military campaign from the south and started sending British troops to Greece. All of this had Hitler pretty concerned, and he moved to protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union.
I mean, that would immediately mean that the Soviet Union and Germany are not friends.
Specifically, Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America. When war first broke out, American public opinion was strongly against joining in. In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, "I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe." And sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe. Unless I have to, then I might." And Roosevelt won. Churchill asked him to join the war, but Roosevelt said, "No can do, Winston. But you know what? Here, have some weapons." America began supplying the Allies with food and munitions, but there was one problem. German U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including American ones.
That would mean war, though, right? Like,
UK would starve.
say like Germany brings their little U-boat like in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, right next to Bermuda, and they're like, bang, your American ship goes to flames, and like 50 out of the 100 people die. That's half the people on board that just died. And that's a lot of people. Like, Germany almost led America to war in World War I in 1915 because of, like, 1,000 Americans or something like that. They died on the Lusitania, which sunk in 18 minutes near Ireland. And that almost led to war with Germany and the U.S., but U.S. Still neutral, very neutral.
Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats. Improved radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics. At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, "Pikecrete. You take some wood, you take some ice, you put them together, you get pikecrete." And then he pulled out a gun and shot some wood and it shattered. And then he shot some pikecrete and the bullet ricocheted off it and hit someone else in the conference room.
I'm not sure if they love it. I'm not sure if they love it.
It was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea.
It is a very dumb idea.
And here at Blue Bunny, we employ the world's best bunnies.
Okay, that's actually a funny advertisement. It's just Bunny Office.
In the end, Alan Turing and his team of codebreakers cracked Germany's Enigma code, and the U-boats gradually became less and less of a threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push
That's a
Italy
defeat
out of
for
Egypt.
Germany.
Hey, that was pretty easy. So they kept going.
Woohoo!
Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something.
Seriously, man, WTF.
Yugoslavia and said, "Hey, I'm going to move troops through you to get to Greece. So either join us or, be invaded." Bulgaria opted to join them. Yugoslavia opted to be invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German-Italian invasion. The British had moved troops from North Africa to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt. And they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months in Tobruk, denying the Germans a strategic port city and disrupting their supply line. Despite having some success in the Middle East, the British didn't seem like any real threat.
I almost forgot that Iraq was on the Axis.
Look out.
Oh.
With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history, and Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending
Dude, watch
attack, but
out.
he dug his head in the sand, and the Soviets didn't stand a chance. Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. 250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Stalingrad was put under a siege that would last an insufferable 4 years. The invasion of Russia had been Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the
Hey, you know what they could have done?
Brutal for all that
and they shouldn't have done this because, they did bad stuff. But with Crimea, they could have landed on the Caucasus and given like a better start to maybe get to Stalingrad somewhere over there. But I'm not sure if that would make them win. But I'm pretty sure they just captured the Caucasus area, which is very mountainous, and the British were also on the war, and they were in the around the same spot. So I'm not sure if that would work.
Hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it.
What? That's how close it was?
It happened. It got cold.
Super duper cold.
Hitler had hoped the Soviets would give up before winter, but they kept fighting. His commanders
Why haven't they surrendered yet?
Can we please dig in for the winter and wait until spring? No. Keep going. But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles. That's fine. Keep going. We're having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can still find our way in the snowdrift. Perfectly normal. Keep going.
Perfectly
Hitler
normal.
had given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then, Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight in the extreme
Go
cold.
get 'em,
The
boys.
Germans were no match. They were now being pushed back. They had no choice but to dig in and wait for winter to end. Germany's victories were staggering, and Japan was eager not to miss the
Wait
victory
for
buzz.
me.
Their war in China had come to a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting those sweet raw materials.
Oh, baby.
They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and Great Britain. It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the Japanese Navy could stand up to the US and the UK. So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies before we begin our conquest? And so it was. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked
21
British
ships
colonies
sunk.
in Southeast Asia. Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war on Japan, and so did Churchill. Hitler then declared war on America, even though he totally didn't have to.
Shot himself in the foot again.
Seemed like a big Japanese victory, but they didn't attack any of the naval repair yards.
That's how they got so.
Meaning the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty soon. In the meantime, though, the Japanese were able to begin their conquest. They took Guam, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They forced Thailand to join them so they could march their troops through to Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North Borneo, the East Indies, New Guinea,
watch
the
the sphere of
Solomons, and
influence.
they were now threatening northern Australia and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the Germans,
Oh,
and
that's
it
a big
reinforced the
sphere of
Japanese idea
influence.
that this was a defined war which they were destined to win. But their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them. For now, though, in all occupied nations, the people suffered. Persecution, forced labor, harsh punishments for any who spoke out against their occupiers. In Europe, the Nazis were rounding up ethnic minorities and other unwanted groups and individuals. In particular, millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust. Brave resistance movements rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people held out for hope. And hope was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue
spoiler alert.
eastward. But this time, he switched off his strategy.
I have
He
a
wanted
better
to
idea.
focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces
The
moved
Americans
across the
should have
north
done
to the
that.
east, and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so, the 6th Army had to reach and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely, and Stalingrad saw some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the
As
German
harsh as
defense
D-Day.
for 5 months as they battled in the war-torn city, which bought them valuable time. When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the 6th Army. Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said, "No, you stay."
Oof. Oh, third time.
The entire 6th Army was trapped and had to surrender. With complete air superiority, the Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For
Woohoo!
Hitler, an absolute catastrophe. Things also weren't looking too good for Hitler elsewhere. With America now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In Africa, the British had pushed Rommel back again. Then they were pushed back again, and finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also already seeing its rapid success being turned around. They attempted to take the island of Midway, but the US Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually,
They sank a lot of
The
carriers.
Japanese Navy would never recover. British, Indian, and Chinese troops held the line in the harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They began to realize they were not invincible.
I mean, no one's
With the access out of
invincible.
Africa, the Allies had to decide.
If everyone in the world
Churchill
today
still wanted to
declared war on the
attack
United
south, while the
States, they
Americans
wouldn't
preferred a
be
full sea invasion
invincible.
in northern France. All right, said the Americans, we'll do it your way. Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops quite warmly. With the war reaching home territory, most Italians just weren't that into it, and Mussolini was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power. Italy immediately began negotiations for surrender.
I'm out.
Hitler wasn't surprised and had already sent reinforcements southward. In an
At this
operation
point,
ironically called
Italy
Operation
just
Axis,
capitulated.
German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north.
Hand it over,
the Allies
bub.
continued fighting the Germans up through Italy.
Yep,
but
they
then winter set
capitulated.
in, meaning mud, and everything slowed to a halt. All right, said the Americans, let's do it our way as well. Germany had made itself a lot of enemies, and millions of Allied troops had been gathering
Wikipedia,
in its
'cause I'm
factories
lazy.
around the clock producing the war material needed for a super crazy massive the likes of which the world has never seen before.
Holy
invasion of Europe.
smokes.
The Germans knew an Allied invasion would come, but they didn't know where it would land. Thanks to Allied deception tactics, they thought there was a pretty good chance it would come at Calais, but the Allies were really going to land in Normandy because it was less fortified and the beaches were nicer. Under the careful planning of General Dwight D.
Just
Eisenhower,
because it's
the
nicer
invasion that
doesn't
had been
mean
long in
that's
the
gonna be
making
the
was just about ready
best
to go.
place to land.
Just one thing
Just
was
saying.
preventing the launch: the British weather. For a short while, everyone sat around waiting for a
No one
decent
likes
day,
the
and
British
then
weather.
It came. On the night of June 5th, over 1,000 bombers took off and raided coastline defenses, while paratroopers were dropped inland in a bit of a chaotic operation, tasked with sabotaging defenses and capturing key bridges to stop any German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Early the next morning, the barrage came, as Allied ships
By 2050,
Cute turtle.
fired a huge number of shells at the German fortifications, and then the landings. The Americans at Utah and Omaha, the British at Golden Sword, and the Canadians at Juneau. It was a tremendous struggle with a great loss of life, particularly at Omaha, but the Allied troops captured the beaches, and the landings were a success. Then they began their movements inland. They took the port of Cherbourg and the city of Caen. The Americans moved south to capture Brittany. Then, in a massive disaster for the Germans, British and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped the German 7th Army in a near wipeout encircling movement. In
Whoa.
August, Allied troops landed in the south of
Yeah,
France.
the
to little
the
resistance.
south of
On one
France.
beach, all they found was a Frenchman handing out champagne. Paris was liberated, and the Germans were pushed out of France as the Allies entered Belgium. In the Far East, the Allies started to push the Japanese out of Burma, as the Americans launched a two-pronged offensive in the Pacific. In the south, General MacArthur led the push to liberate the Philippines, while General Nimitz oversaw the brutal island-hopping campaign. American forces had to make hard-fought landing after hard-fought landing on fiercely defended small islands. As
They did
moved
take
steadily
over the
towards
Philippines, though. They
Japanese
did
mainland. The
both
Japanese
strategies.
knew that the greatest thing a person could do was to die in battle, and the most dishonorable act was to surrender. As a result, they fought
Surrendering,
ferociously,
though, you
very
don't
and
get
the closer
killed.
The Americans got to the mainland, the more ferocious the resistance became. In February 1945, the Americans captured the island of Iwo Jima, and an intense firebombing campaign of Japan's wooden cities began. The Allies suffered some setbacks trying to liberate the Netherlands, but they were making progress and were now threatening the industrial heartland of Germany. Hitler's health, both mentally and physically, was rapidly deteriorating. Things were looking bad.
Mental
He was
and physical
desperate. He
health
said,
is
"We
what
need
he
to turn
needs."
this thing around, and I've just the
Okay,
trick.
maybe I shouldn't
Remember
say
a few years
that.
back when we blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and trapped the Allied forces in Belgium? Well, I'm going to do the exact same thing.
And it's gonna fail.
Again. He gathered his forces and tried to pound them through the Ardennes. He used up the remainder of Germany's strength and resources.
I like the
and he
gunfire
managed to
in the
create quite a
background.
nice bulge. He also trapped some
Just a
American
nice sound
forces in the
effect.
Belgian town of Bastogne. The Germans sent the trapped Americans a message saying surrender or be annihilated. When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender? No,
Oh,
sir,
they
want us to surrender."
yeah, you.
Nuts! And that's what they sent off as their official reply. General Patton's Third Army then
Did they actually do that?
siege from the
Nuts.
southwest, and the Germans were pushed back. Hitler's last-ditch attempt had failed, and what
Oh.
followed was a total collapse of the German
You're
forces.
dead, bro.
The Allies pushed into Germany from
You're
both
dead.
sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin. In his bunker, Hitler realized
Shot
all hope
himself
was
in the
lost.
face.
Berlin fell, and with it, Hitler's dreams of a great German empire. Two of the Axis nations had been knocked out.
And
One
oh
was
yeah,
out.
and
The
Finland did
Americans
switch
began their
sides
assault
too.
on Okinawa, the last island
And
before
so
they
did
reached
Thailand.
the Japanese mainland. The desperate Japanese fought hard, launching kamikaze attacks on the U.S. ships.
Kamikaze.
The citizens of Okinawa suffered through the terrible fighting, but in 2 months, the island was captured. The Allies now had to make a choice. Either continue the devastating struggle up the Japanese mainland, or they could try to coerce the Japanese into surrendering now. In July, the
I say
first
second
bomb
option.
test took place in New Mexico, and the destructive weapon was ready for use. America and the UK were also seeing the Soviet Union not
Oh,
so much
here we go with
liberating
the
as
Cold War.
occupying its captured territories. And so they wanted to
Spoiler
put on
alert.
a show of force. On August 6th, the A-bomb fell on Hiroshima.
Hiroshima.
Then, on the 9th,
Nagasaki.
Nagasaki.
Yeah.
The cities were reduced to rubble, and for the people living there, it was a terrible fate. But for the Allies, it achieved their main aim. In September, the Emperor announced Japan's surrender, saying
Probably because they were horrified about Tokyo getting bombed.
To Japan's advantage. After 6 years, war was finally over. The Allies occupied Japan for 8 years. The Emperor was allowed to keep his position, but General MacArthur made sure
we got a unified Korea, not for long though,
to display to the Japanese people that their Emperor was not the divine, powerful being they had believed. Germany was divided between America, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Allied sectors were united into West Germany. The Second World War had been more terrible and destructive than the first. In its aftermath, two major superpowers with two very different ideologies had come out victorious.
Oh, and everybody else had to pick a side.
A very, very cold one.
A very cold one.
Wow, Churchill, that looks just like me.
I'm pretty sure that's it. Well, thank you guys for watching this re-uploaded, oversimplified World War II. Sorry the last one was muted. I actually tried making another one on the Saturday. But it is daily upload week, so this is Monday's video. I just forgot to upload it. So, yeah. I'm recording this on Tuesday. It's probably going to be uploaded later today. Or, like, a few seconds after I just recorded this. So, I hope you guys have an awesome week as I upload every week of the day. I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.